Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are in the world, to our webinar, Myth-Busting Enterprise Security and Compliance. With me, I'm Liam, and I'll be the host, and Nicki Borell, who's joined us. Good to have you on board, Nicki.
Hello, thank you for the chance to talk about this interesting topic.
Good. And it is an interesting topic, and actually it's a perfect timing as well, based on Microsoft Ignite is coming up soon. Microsoft are going to make some more announcements about things, so this is perfect time to kind of talk about security and compliance. Just as a set of information, if you want to move to the next slide for us, Nicki.
Yes.
Obviously, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality instead of the chat. It's a bit hard for us to kind of capture the chat that's going on, but if you have questions, by all means, add questions, and we'll try to get some of those a little bit later. We'll pick some of those questions up. The webinar is being recorded, and yes, you'll get a copy of that later today once it's been completed. So that's just some basic house rules that we've got going on. If you have any issues or any questions, just feel free to put them in there. So I'll turn the time over now to Nicki. The time is yours.
Thank you. Yeah. So the title of this webinar is Myth-Busting Enterprise Security and Compliance. And for me, working in this topic as a consultant, I found out that the biggest problem my customers have with this topic is it's so wide range, not only of scenarios, but also of stuff. Microsoft is just releasing functions, features, licenses to cover all these different scenarios. And my part in this session is to give you a clear overview of what is in the box by Microsoft to help you make your environment secure and compliant. So the key takeaways of this session is the overall Microsoft security story. The Microsoft security story with real-world examples and also with some interesting demos and animated examples so that you have a good overview of what is available from Microsoft and what is the idea behind all these products and features. And let's start with real-world scenarios. And the real-world scenarios is that it is interesting to see where we're coming from and what is, in most situations, I know from my customers, still in mind of the IT administrators, of the data security and data privacy officers. And so what I learned is, this is where we're coming from. It's just the good old days where we have our on-prem servers in our own data center, and everything is under control of our IT. All the identities in our local Active Directory, the devices, we control the applications that are used by the employees and where the data is located and which data is shared and which not. But as you all know, time has changed, and in today's world, we have so many applications like Salesforce, like Box, like Google services, Dropbox, WhatsApp, and so on and so on. And this is a real-world scenario when we have a look at enterprise IT today. So these good old days where our IT administrator can control what's going on are gone. Poor message for all of them, but that's the truth. And on the other side, what Microsoft did is Microsoft has just came around the corner with stuff like identity and access management, features focusing data loss prevention. We have stuff like information right management, mobile device management, and so on and so on. And if you just use Google or Bing or what else to search the internet of what features are available, what licenses do I need, it is a really confusing story. And this is why we're here today, to make it a little bit more clear. What is the idea behind all these different features and functions to make an environment like Office 365 and Azure, or also a hybrid or on-prem environment, secure and compliant? So all these different scenarios, features, functions are grouped together by Microsoft in these three main topics. It's protect at the front door, protect your data anywhere, and detect attacks. And as you can see in the detailed descriptions, features like, for example, Cloud Access Security Broker are focusing to not only one topic. Let's go step by step through these scenarios and see where stuff like mobile application management, mobile device management, cloud app security, AAP, and all these different stuff came together and get an end-to-end story to protect and secure your environment. So the licensing bundle focusing to all this is called Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security, which is available in different versions. There's the E3 and also the E5, but this is how Microsoft is just delivering these features and functions. And first of all, let's start with the protect at the front door story. So this is the front door. And it is about identity and access management. So in identity and access management, not only is about managing user accounts, it is definitely more like this. We will just see in the next couple of minutes. First of all, let's start again thinking about where we're coming from. Security perimeters before mobility and cloud was just like this. Our company IT is just controlling everything which is used in our enterprise. Users, devices, apps, data, everything. But today, we have a lot of cloud apps which can be used from the end users for free, or even using their mobile device or using their own device to set up business processes. Stuff like Salesforce or let's say Box are focusing to enterprise scenarios. But as you all know, users are just taking WhatsApp to organize business meetings or just to negotiate with customers. And so this is definitely out of control of the enterprise IT of your company. On the other side, we have these mobile and personal devices. So bring your own device is not a new thing, but as today, Microsoft is able to deliver a fully integrated management suite to manage all these mobile personal devices and also enterprise devices. And on the third topic, we have the identity itself. And it's the same story. Yes, of course, you have your Active Directory login, which is maybe just coming from your on-prem Active Directory. But you also have identities. Maybe you're using Salesforce with your private account, or you're using Slack with a private account. So it's not only having your own device, it's also that we have in the enterprise a mix of the identity which is provided by your company and other identities coming from services in the internet. So this is where we have to deal with, and so this scenario is just really flexible, and a lot of different services, identities, apps, and devices are used today. And the good news is that there is one single place we can manage all of these different stories from a central point, which is Azure Active Directory. But as I said, it's not only managing user accounts, it's definitely more. So let's see some further examples in this animated demo. What Microsoft set up with Azure Active Directory, it's on the left side, as you can see, we have, people, persons who want to enter company data or use company apps. We have devices trying to connect to our Office 365. And then we have something we called a condition, like, is it a privileged user, or is it a call or a request coming from a well-known IP address? Or maybe is it an anonymous IP address? Is it a managed device? And so on and so on. So we can set up conditions if an account or a device wants to connect to our enterprise environment. And on the other side, we can just say, what should happen if? So for example, we can say, if there is just a login from a well-known device, from a well-known internal managed user, then go. If there is just a login from an unknown device or maybe from an external user, then please require multi-factor authentication. And based on this intelligence machine, we can set up different scenarios for different situations in the enterprise. Let's have a closer look to some really interesting examples. So This example is controlling access based on conditions. As you can see, we have a user. This user is in a sales role. He's just coming from the subsidiary in London. He's using a mobile client and so on and so on. And as you can see, the client is fully patched. It's a managed device managed by our IT. And last logon was in the London office. And he tries to access the travel app. And Azure Active Directory says, okay, because of all these conditions are set like they are, there is a really low risk and I allow the access. No problem. Let's see another scenario. Control access based on this condition is that we have a user and he is just in a sensitive group. He's part of the executive group. And he tries to access the sales app, which is a high business impact app. And because of this is just a more risky call. And our condition says, okay, please use MFA. Without any action need to do by our administrator, it's because of these different parameters are changing. Automatically, Azure Active Directory says, please use multi-factor authentication. And in this third scenario, we say, okay, we also have a user, he tries to access, but in this scenario, the client is an anonymous client, which is not managed by the company IT, and it is just connecting from Azure, which maybe is just an unsecure area. So Azure Active Directory says, oh, this is just a high access risk. And because of it tries to access the sales app, which is a medium business impact app, the access is blocked. Also with no interaction needed by the IT administrator. And this is just really interesting that we can use all these parameters to set up dynamic rules controlling who can access our enterprise data and access from which device or from which location is with a high risk or with a low risk. Let's see another really interesting feature of Azure Active Directory. It's the so-called privileged identity management. You know, as a global administrator, you can access every data in Office 365. And even if you're not part of a group, you can just make you a member of a group because of you're the global administrator. And so it is not a good idea that even administrators have this global administrator role every day for their everyday job, reading their emails and using Teams or stuff like this. It is okay if they're only a normal domain user. But what if this IT administrator or help desk employee needs to do administrative stuff for just fixing an issue or something like this? And then you can use the so-called privileged identity management. So based on a web form, you can say, okay, I need now to be a global administrator or Exchange administrator or what else. And this is given to him for a special time frame. And after this is expired, he's just getting back to a normal user. So we can just minimize the risk that a global admin account is just used if it is not needed. Also a feature of Azure Active Directory. Let's talk about protect data, protecting data wherever it is located. And the feature we use for this is Azure Information Protection. Azure Information Protection is just protecting our data, and there is no dependency where this data is located, even if you store it on a USB drive or just send it out per email. Because of in Azure Information Protection, the security is just traveling with the file because of it is directly attached to the file itself. And Azure Information Protection can be used for much more scenarios, not only for classification and labeling. You can also use it to detect sensible data and to monitor where sensible files are just sent to, who's trying to open it, and so on. Let's go a little bit more deeper. So this is just a typical life cycle of a sensitive file. So the file is just created maybe in your OneDrive, or maybe in your box folder, or you just set up your, the file in your local hard drive. And after this, you say, okay, this is sensitive data. And we have to deal with this, that it's sensitive, and we classify and label it using Azure Information Protection. So the file is then protected, is encrypted, and no one else, except the persons you assign the rights to, can open or read or modify or print out or do a screenshot or what else of this file. And on the other side, we can protect the file based on so-called policies. So what we can do is, for example, we can say if a file is saved in a special SharePoint document library or on a special file share on our on-prem file server, then automatically a label like confidential or finance data or contract or what else is just applied. And then the data is traveling because of you send the file out to some colleagues or to partners or customers. And with Azure Information Protection, we can monitor who tries to open this file, from where he tries to open this file, from which location, which device. And we also have the chance to revoke the access to a file. So even if a file is just sent by email or copied on a USB drive, we keep control of the file because of Azure Information Protection is doing this for us. Also, at this scenario, let's have, okay, before we come to the example, just one word to Azure Information Protection Scanner, which is just a really new feature. It was announced at last year Ignite. Azure Information Protection Scanner is part of the free Azure Information Protection Client download. And this scanner can be used to scan file servers or SharePoint document libraries, beginning with SharePoint 2013 or newer. And as I said, you can say, okay, please scan this document library and label every file. Or you can use it in a discovery mode and can say, okay, please scan this file server. And if ever you detect a file which is matching a policy, like for example, a credit card number is just in this document, or there is a special contract number or what else you just set up in your environment, then the scanner just create a report about these files, and you can just decide maybe to protect them or do whatever you want to do with these files. So let's see some examples what you can do based on protected data or based on stuff like in this example, combination of Microsoft Azure Active Directory and Intune to manage sensible data or data you will want to keep secure on devices. And yeah, so in this scenario, we have just a device which is just managed by our IT, and the account is managed by Azure Active Directory, and this is one of our employees. And on this device, we have managed apps, which are managed by Intune. And of course, we have just personal apps, which is just deployed by the user, managed by the user, and where corporate IT don't have anything to do with this. So for the managed apps, we can set up policies based on mobile application management, mobile device management, and Azure Directory in combination. So definitely in these managed apps, we have apps like, for example, Word, which are used for private and for company data, which is no problem. But what we can do when we use managed apps is, for example, you get an email, and then part of this email is just an attachment, which is an Excel file. And now you say, oh, that's cool. Let's store it to my, let's say, Dropbox folder. And because of your company IT set up a rule and says, no, sorry, Dropbox is not a managed app, so you cannot copy this to your private Dropbox account. It won't work on that device. Say, okay, let's do a trick. I just copy and paste the Excel into my Word, which works because of Excel and Word are both managed. And then I try to save the Word to my private data storage. Let's save my private OneDrive. And even in this scenario, this says, no, you cannot. You get an error on your mobile phone or on your iPad or what else you're using because of private OneDrive is not managed. But what works is copy this or save this on the OneDrive for Business instance, which is also part of your iPad or Android pad or what else. So this is a combination of device and application management, bringing in Azure Active Directory, bringing in Intune, and bringing in mobile application management. Even a really interesting other topic is classic mobile device management stuff like remote wipe. So we can use Intune also to delete data on a managed device, which is, okay, I now just use the bad password and say GDPR, you know. So GDPR is just coming with some regulations for companies. And one of this is, for example, that you have to have a concept, or you had to have services in place to remote wipe a device if it's stolen. So it's about restriction and deletion of data, and even what we know about a data protection impact assessment. So that means, what do you do if a device is just getting lost or stolen, which sensitive personal data on? And so with Microsoft Intune, you can, for example, do the remote wipe. Okay, let's go into another scenario, which is in this scenario a combination again of mobile application management and Intune, and also Azure Active Directory. So a user and account is managed in Azure Active Directory. Tries, or you want to just protect sensitive data on an unmanaged device. So the user is just uploading data in his OneDrive for Business account, and he's just setting up OneDrive for Business on his mobile device. And because of the device is managed, and Intune is just recognizing this, the user is just asked to prompt or create a PIN to make it secure. And after he just set up this, so OneDrive for Business is then also managed by Intune, then he can just upload and save this document in the device. If he tries to save this document in a private file store, for example, Dropbox, he says, no, this is not allowed, but it is allowed to save it on OneDrive for Business because this is managed by Intune. Another scenario is just to secure corporate data on personal device. So you say, okay, user adds a business account to his email app, and the same story. The user is prompted to enroll the device. So Intune is just checking the minimum device compliance, like OS version or which mail client version do you use. And if this is all okay, because of the company administrator says, okay, if you're minimum using iOS version 10 point whatever, then it is okay. And you can use this private mail app to contact your business email address. And you can just access your corporate emails. Even for just accessing data in SharePoint and OneDrive, we have some rules we can set up in SharePoint and OneDrive for Business Admin Center. And you can see here on this example that you can configure control access based on network locations. And we can also set up this rules based in Azure Active Directory. And in this scenario, if you just set it up here, and if you also set up rules in Azure Active Directory, the rules in Azure Active Directory are prioritized. So just you have to deal how on which location you will configure it. And there's just a little bit a licensing thought because of configure it for in SharePoint and OneDrive for Business Admin Center. There is no additional license needed. If you just configure it in Azure Active Directory, you need Azure Active Directory Premium. Let's see another really interesting example. So it's about to protect and control data in cloud apps. So in this scenario, a user is just setting up a document, and this document is just protected with Azure Information Protected. It is just labeled and protected with the label internal. And now he uploads it to a public share. And because we are using the feature Cloud App Security, Cloud App Security is just recognizing this and says, oh no, there is just a policy which is saying that stuff which is flagged with the Azure Information Protection label internal cannot be uploaded to a public share. And automatically, this policy is just starting a rule engine, which is just moving it to a special folder where only the owner and the administrator have access to. And in this scenario, also the administrator get a notification, you can configure per email or per text message, that a user is just trying to do this. So this is also an example where these different Microsoft technologies, in this scenario, Azure Active Directory, Azure Information Protection, and the feature Cloud App Security work together to set up an end-to-end secure scenario. So let's come to the last point. It's about detecting some threats, and there is the most known feature, Cloud App Security. So what we can do based on this is just analyzing typical scenarios and footprints in our enterprise IT, even in our on-prem systems. To do this, there's just a function to upload your firewall logs to Cloud App Security so that it's also analyzed what's going on in your on-prem and which third-party cloud apps are used from your enterprise network. Cloud App Security is part of Microsoft Threat Protection, which is just doing a lot of different things. So the Threat Protection family is covering the iOS with Windows Defender, is just covering Exchange with Exchange Online Protection, and even cloud apps with Microsoft Cloud App Security. So it's just also a big, big story. And yes, you can choose different services. You can say, oh, okay, for me, only Windows Defender is interesting, or maybe for me, only Cloud App Security is interesting because of I use, let's say, mobile iron to manage and keep my devices secure. That's fine. But you can also take all these different services from Microsoft to set up an end-to-end scenario to secure everything and also the devices in your enterprise. Here's just an example of what advanced threat protection can do for you. The screenshot you can see here is just something coming from Exchange threat protection. So the scenario is a user getting a mail, and in this mail there's just a link, but the mail is not directly sent to the user's inbox. Oh, okay, it is directly sent to the user's inbox, but the link in the mail is just replaced by a secure link. So if the user is just clicking to the link, there is no direct forward to the website, which is detected as unsecure. The user getting this message in his browser, which say, this is not a secure website, and because of this, the access is blocked. And this is done, for example, by advanced threat protection for Exchange. So let's have some other infos about Cloud App Security, which is a dedicated service. There's two different versions. We have Cloud App Security as part of Office 365, and we have Microsoft Cloud App Security as an independent service. So Cloud App Security is all about monitoring, setting up policies, setting up rules based on files, based on interactions by users, and based on apps. So for example, you can say if a new app which is not known or not managed by your IT trying to access data in OneDrive for Business, then send a text message to the administrator, then block this request, and so on and so on. Or you can, for example, say if a user is just sharing a file to a company with a special domain, then just block this, or then just only allowed if there is no Azure Information Protection label on this file, and so on and so on. So Cloud App Security is just the security framework or the security engine covering all of your Office 365 Azure, and even if you just want this, your on-prem data, and monitor what's going on and automatically set up rules if something is going on that you don't want to have. So roundup. In Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security, we have a lot of different features to detect, to focus to really special scenarios, or maybe to set up a really end-to-end story to protect your complete environment and all the services. So we have Azure Active Directory, we have Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, which is just analyzing what's going on in your enterprise IT, and maybe say, hey, there are 1,000 login drives from let's say Australia, and you don't have any business or subsidiary in Australia, so that means something is just going on which is not okay. We have Azure Information Protection to protect sensitive data, even if it's traveling on a USB stick or on mail. We have Microsoft Cloud App Security, which is just providing a deep visibility and control of data inside the applications. And of course, we have Microsoft Intune, which is made to manage mobile applications or applications just trying to access your data and your environment and devices. At the end, from a strategic or licensing perspective, all these different stories are just focusing to identity and access management, mobile device and app management, information protection, and threat protection. These are the 4 main stories we have in Microsoft 365 universe. And okay, at the end, it is, yes, different features and functions just need different licenses. As I said, Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security, we have E3 and E5, and depending on what your scenarios are, you need one of these licenses. So first of all, just talk to your business decision makers, talk to your users, talk to your data privacy officers, and create your scenarios. Just figure out and work out what scenarios do you have in your company. Then set up your rules and try to find out or work out which licenses or model fits best to fulfill all your needs. And with this, I'm just done with this quick overview, and I hand over to Liam.
Cool, thank you. Okay, let me just quickly change over. Okay, so you should be able to see the slides now. So thank you, Nicki. That was a fantastic overview of what Microsoft has in the core stack. So what I want to kind of to add to this is to talk a little bit about security and risk management, which is really the purpose of the Microsoft technologies, is really about this, managing security and managing risk within your Office 365 tenant. Now, Microsoft released some documentation a while ago, basically mapping security controls within Office 365 and the Microsoft Cloud to the NIST framework. So what I wanted to do is kind of just outline what some of these are. So we have these specific blocks, and you'll notice that in the NIST framework, there were 4 components. One was identify, one was protect, one was detect, and one was respond. Now, as you can see from what Nicki's talked about, Microsoft kind of follow that same practice also of being able to identify any risks, provide protections, detect anomalies or behavioral changes using analysis tools, and then being able to actively respond. And this is obviously based around the NIST security framework, which is not a Microsoft thing. It's been around for a long time. And so this is a framework that's available. Now, if we drill down into each of these areas, so if we talk about identity and being able to identify, this is about developing an organizational understanding about managing cybersecurity risks to protect assets, data, and capabilities. And really in the Microsoft stack, the core areas of focus that Microsoft have here are really around application access control, single sign-on, device management, and then normal protection controls. So actually being able to identify at the door, just like Nicki said, protection at the door, being able to identify at the point of connection of what's going on. Now, once we've been able to identify, then the next step is about protecting. So developing and implementing safeguards to ensure delivery of critical infrastructure services. And so really the key entry point here in the Microsoft stack is around Azure Active Directory conditional access rules. And these are fantastic. I mean, it's taken a few years for Microsoft to get to the point where they are as rich as they are now, but they're now available across the board and allow you to have control, just as Nicki explained, of people coming into the system. You know, simple things as, well, you're not on a company network, I'm not going to allow you access, even down to different countries or IP rules or just conditional rules based around the devices that are connecting. So the ability to protect. On top of that, that actually shouldn't say protect, that should say detect. But detect is to develop and implement appropriate activities to identify the occurrence of a cybersecurity event. Now, Microsoft has given us great tools for this. So advanced threat protection, Windows Defender, ATP, Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, and then Azure Advanced Threat Protections. And then we could go one step further and come out of Office 365 to the core cloud and look at Windows Defender and Windows Threat Protection as well. So these are capabilities that are specifically tuned and created and developed in a way that will look for abnormalities in user behavior. It's really around behavioral analysis of what's going on. And so these are there to kind of, you know, Steve comes into work in the morning, opens up the laptop and checks the email. Sue comes in, opens the laptop, checks email, goes to SharePoint, does whatever. It builds normal behavioral pictures. But then let's say Sue comes in tomorrow and starts downloading hundreds of thousands of files off OneDrive. That's probably an event that you may want to be notified of. And so those capabilities are available. And then of course, on top of that, we have our last one, which is respond. And this is one of the, for me, this is one of the most important things. Response processes and procedures are executed, maintained to ensure timely responses. So here we're looking at the usage information that's available. And I think this is fantastic. The amount of information that we can capture and actually analyze with inside Office 365 and the core Microsoft stack has got better and better and better. Just the ability to be able to see who signed in from where, what the application is trying to do, admin activity events, not just user ones, being able to see, for example, who created a Power App or who didn't, who created a flow or who did something else. That means that I'm able to then provide a better response to any specific situation, any cybersecurity events that come in. And so Microsoft have these great capabilities that, if I just go back in my slides for a second and talk about the 4 NIST things, that it covers those 4 blocks: identify, protect, detect, and respond. So I suppose, let me just skip through to get to the next slide. The question for me is, what is missing within Office 365? So we spend all this time looking at the cool capabilities that Microsoft put in there. Microsoft invest lots and lots of money in testing and building new platforms and adding new capabilities, and they keep buying up security companies all over the place. But is there anything missing within Office 365 or in the Microsoft 365 stack? Well, to kind of set this precedent, the title for me kind of gives it away. Customizations are applications in their own right. And so I recently wrote a blog post that kind of talked about this, and this is obviously some of my own personal view and things like that. But truly, that's correct. That when we make a customization into SharePoint Online or something else like a Power App or a Flow, the reason we're actually doing that is because we want to extend existing functionality and create some kind of business process into an application, whether it's data entry screens, whether it's some cool SharePoint framework web parts, or whether it's something else. It's still an application that's being built. Now, when we think about that, we think about the protections that Office 365 has. We have to really narrow down the tool set that's available. Now, we know, for example, if I was to integrate Dropbox into Office 365, so for example, I got my own Dropbox and I connected it in, that would get flagged in Cloud App Security because it would get shown up as an application that's coming in. If I was to, for example, I worked with a client recently where we looked at Cloud App Security and found that they'd been connecting Amazon Alexa devices to Office 365, purely based on the fact that they could read the email to them and all that kind of, which I actually thought was quite cool, but still something that wasn't sanctioned. And so that got flagged. But then think about this. I build a SharePoint framework web part and drop it in a SharePoint page. What's the risk associated to that? Is there a risk? Is there not a risk? Does it get flagged? And the answer is no. I mean, when you think about applications, we're talking about these kind of customization pieces. So JavaScript, SharePoint framework, C#, kind of managed solutions, forms, flow, Power Apps, and they all come together to make an application. So when we think about what's missing, based on that, what's missing? Well, for me, there's a series of things that are missing. The first one for me is environment configuration, scanning, and monitoring. Now, you may come back and say, but hey, we've got Secure Score, and Secure Score does do that, and it does, and I agree with you. But Secure Score is based on best practice of configuration as far as environmental configuration goes, but only the specific ones that have been determined as part of that approach. There are other configuration settings that you may change as an organization or as an IT person or as an end user or as a developer that don't get flagged up in Secure Score. All of these come under application protections. So for example, there's no deprecation and security policy checking. And what I mean by that is, let's say you build a component that goes in a page and it's referencing jQuery, because that's quite common, but you're using an out-of-date version of jQuery. There's no way of it being flagged and saying, hey, did you know you're using an old version that actually has some security issues? There's no proactive security policy rules-based notifications for those types of application events that we're trying to find. Application and customization governance and monitoring. There's no way of controlling, well, hey, somebody keeps adding JavaScript files to the pages. There's no way of controlling and actually investigating what's going on. And there's no deep application code analysis. Those are pieces that are missing. And when you think of a customization as an application, then it starts to make more sense of why you would need to have something like this to kind of give you that extra protection over the top of the really good Microsoft capabilities that are there. So if we talk about the one, so environment configuration, scanning and monitoring, we're not necessarily talking about, well, hey, you know, did you switch on something in SharePoint or something in OneDrive? We're talking about configuration that could be impacted by, you know, for example, you may make a change to allow certain customizations to run on pages. That's a configuration entry that should be scanned and monitored. We already talked about deprecation. When we talk about proactive security and policy rules, you know, wouldn't it be nice to know when the next person adds a piece of JavaScript to a page, or adds a SharePoint framework component, or installs an add-in into the SharePoint infrastructure, or is customizing Microsoft Teams, or maybe has built a new one? There's no proactive rules or security checks against those. And so that's something that should be there. It should be something to check those. And then, of course, for us, obviously here at Rencore, deep application code analysis. That's one of our core stacks of tools for being able to analyze what the code is actually doing. You know, so when I do have a business user that goes onto my blog site and downloads a piece of JavaScript that I wrote for testing and puts it in production, that there's a way of analyzing the code to say, hey, you might not want to do that, or you may want to check what it's supposed to be doing in the first place before you put it there. So in order for us to do this, there's a series of questions that I kind of want you to ask yourself. So I'm going to put these questions out. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, do I know, obviously say you, do you know where all the customizations are within your Office 365 tenant? So do you know where they are? Do you even know if you have any? I can promise you that about 90% of the time when I've asked that question, people will say there's no customizations within my Office 365 tenant. And that's because, which is why I changed the word customization to application, because when people think of customizations, we think of C# code. We think of a dev sitting there writing something. And that's not the case. With the whole movement of citizen development, where we can use the tools that are there, it doesn't need a developer. It just needs someone that can go and build a Power App or build a flow or learn how to make a REST call and write some JavaScript, or just download a library that already exists that somebody else has built. The second question, do you know how many script editor web parts are on the site? And that's always a good question too, because everyone says, well, there's none of them. And trust me, there's probably a bunch of them. And what we tend to find is that end users or business users who put them on tend to hide them on the page too, because they don't need them to show, they just need them to execute whatever the code is under the covers. And so people don't know that they even exist. But that's an important one, because a script editor web part lets me put whatever JavaScript I want inside that editing component and execute it. And we've done webinars in the past. I know myself and Waldeck did a webinar where we were able to write JavaScript code in a script editor web part. And the idea being here that when an end user went to the site that had the code that they had taken from the blog site, that the page would error. And then they would call IT and say, hey, the page doesn't work. But when IT went to the page, it would load successfully. But it would also call into the Microsoft Graph and do a bunch of other stuff too. So do you know where the script editor web part's on? You also know where there's any custom JavaScript on the pages. So has anybody added it somewhere else? Do we have content editor web parts on the page anywhere where you've got hacked in JavaScript or something else? Or is there a component that's injecting? I remember looking at a component once in 365 that you put it on the page. It was an add-in that was written in C#. So it was a provider hosted add-in. But when it got onto the page, it called a JavaScript file and injected it into the page it was running in. So you have to see, like, what is it trying to do? Another question, do you know who made configuration changes last? That's a great question. I love asking that question because no one really seems to know. It goes back. I even like asking it more for people that have SharePoint on premises, because most of their IT people will log in with the same account every single time. So they're using the farm admin credentials potentially, all logging in together, all making changes. And then when something goes wrong, amazingly, no one seems to want to own up because you can't tell. So obviously that's a best practice change for having separate accounts. But do you know what configuration changes? Next question, is my tenant configured for the best security? And the things that Nicki talked about, I mean, enabling those components, purchasing the licenses that are needed would allow you to create the best security inside Office 365 and the Microsoft Cloud, because those services are so baked into the core platform that why would you not enable them? I remember I spoke with a client recently who'd had a security breach in Office 365 that nobody had hacked it, but they'd had credentials compromised and then they'd made a bunch of changes in the tenant. If they had just enabled one of the simplest things in Office 365, so multi-factor authentication, it would never have happened because there would have been no way for that account to be compromised if you're looking for a second factor or even a third factor, depending how you're doing it. So don't underestimate the power of the Microsoft controls that are in there. They will get you a long way to where you need to go for protecting at the door and coming in. And lastly, do you know what the code is doing on your site? Do you know? So for example, do you have a vendor that you're working with that's building some components for you? And do you trust them? Which I assume you do because they're your vendor. But do you know what their code is doing? Have they explained to you? Have you had it checked? Have you run an analysis against that code? If not, then how can you trust what that code is doing? So these are just some questions that you need to kind of ask as you go through the process of deploying an Office 365 tenant, working out security practices, defining how to control access, how to control data, how to make sure that your data is not leaving the organization, for example, with data exfiltration, making sure your accounts are protected. Ask those questions, because when we change the wording from a customization to an application, it becomes more powerful, because no longer is it just a piece of code on a page that we often don't care about. We then start to understand what that code can actually do. So obviously one of the things at Rencore is we have the Rencore Platform. And the Rencore Platform, for me, is built into 4 specific blocks. The first block for me is customization governance. Then we have vulnerability detection, then code analysis and quality, and then continuous monitoring. And all of that is wrapped around what we refer to as the risk assessment. The idea being here that you have great tools in the Microsoft stack. And trust me, the tools are fantastic. I actually had a call last week with one of the VPs at Microsoft about some of these tools, about how great they were, but also coming to understand that there are some areas that don't get covered by the Microsoft stack. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you build a security infrastructure of components, you're not always using the same vendor. You're not always using everything, and not every vendor has every type of tool that you would ever need. But here at Rencore with our platform, we can do the customization governance. We can look for vulnerabilities and tell you that you're using an older version of jQuery or a library that has known vulnerabilities, for example, to do with data exfiltration or breach detection. We can also do code analysis and quality, checking those assets that have been deployed against best practice rules, not just security rules, but is the code actually good in the first place? And then, of course, providing continuous monitoring, that proactive monitoring, which maps nicely to the pillar in the NIST framework for responding, allowing you to respond. And with all of that wrapped by one of our core offerings, which is the risk assessment, which allows you to have us at Rencore perform a risk analysis on your tenant, looking for these 4 pillars, and then providing you with a report based on that. That's the extra that comes to the table. No one's taking away from the Microsoft tool sets that are already there, but don't forget about those little bits and pieces. Don't forget about the customizations. Don't forget about the code that was added to a page. Don't forget about the power apps or the flows. Don't forget about the forms that might be built. Too often we spend so much time focused on the overall general access control and then controlling things like Word documents and spreadsheets that we forget the real threat and risk that can come from customization. Okay, so we'll open the time now to any questions that you guys may have. I'm just going to have a quick look at the list, if I can find it. I know there was a question for you in there, Nicki.
Okay.
Just lost my mouse for a second. There we go, Q&A. Yeah, there was a question for you, and then I have a question for you. The first question was, AIP requires a client to work on systems. What happens if the end user doesn't install that client? Will it open the file or will it block the file?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's the need for a client, which is free download and also available for iOS, Android, and so on. If you just get a protected file and you don't have the client or even the viewer, you cannot open the file. That's the answer.
Okay, so nice and straightforward. You can't open the file. So it's truly protected. So
yes,
get into that.
Yeah. So a little bit more details. If it is just the Office files or Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you cannot see from the file extension if it is protected by Azure Information Protection or not. It's just a docx or a pptx or what else. But if you double click it and you only have, let's say, a normal Word, no enterprise version, then Word says you don't have the rights to open the file or you cannot access the content of the file. If it is just, let's say, a JPEG or a PDF, then you can see in the file extension that it is protected, because if you have a PDF, then after the protection, it is a PPDF or it is a PJPEG for protect. So there is no MIME mapping to open it, and you need the Azure Information Protection client or viewer, which is, again, a free download also in the app stores for the mobiles to open it.
Perfect. And I use that download too on my Office tools. It's a great integration. It's really simple to use as well. So I know I've worked with a few clients recently where we're in the process of deploying that out across the board. And of course, there was a little bit of kickback first from the end users of something else that they have to use. But actually, once they started looking at it and seeing how well it worked, they've adopted it instantly. And so I really like that approach, adding into the Office stack, and it kind of works. But thank you. Another question for me this time: who maintains the definitions that are used to detect old versions of things like jQuery? So I suppose we'll answer that in 2 parts. The first one is there are many vendors outside that maintain what's referred to as CVEs. So basically, these are the vulnerabilities that are found within applications or within specific files. So for example, if we take your example of jQuery, jQuery is obviously listed. And for example, there are many providers out there that will come back and say, oh, we found a vulnerability, or jQuery themselves, the people that maintain the jQuery repository, will come back and say, we've found a security vulnerability, and we're going to fix that in the next version. And then they'll flag that inside, for example, the NPM store. So for example, a SharePoint framework component, you'll be pulling things in using NPM. And so it will actually come up and say, we've found a security vulnerability in this version. So we have industry leaders that are monitoring all types of libraries and finding those vulnerabilities and then listing those and making those available. Now, from the Rencore side, the rules and the definitions to be able to find those are maintained within the Rencore platform. So for example, we create rules that would look at the versions of jQuery. So for example, if you have a web part on a page that's using client-side code, at the point that we intercept that as part of the scan, it'll look at it and say, oh, we can see a reference here to jQuery. Let's just go and get that file from the URL that it's been listed. Oh, hold on, this is version 1 point something. We'll then do a call and check to the vulnerability and say, is that out of date? Is it old? Is it new? And then we flag that back as part of that rule. So it's a two-pronged attack. We have best practice rules that are created to handle that. And then we use industry mechanisms to be able to make sure that we pick up the right ones. It's the same process as if you wanted to check for any platform. So for example, if you have SharePoint on premises, you can go to a website, cvedetails.com, and you could just do a search for SharePoint and it will list any of the current vulnerabilities that have been found. So we use a combination of threat intelligence information that's industry-wide and then analysis rules that we have on our own. The next question for you, Nicki, what is the easiest way to find what content has been shared externally from Office 365?
The easiest way, depending on your role. So a couple of ideas. On my blog, I just wrote a post on how it is really easy to find out which data you shared externally all over the system using search. It's a simple search query. Showed external is true. If it is your focus that you're the administrator of, let's say, a SharePoint site, then there is just a report in your SharePoint online site collection showing you which content is shared externally. If you are the global administrator or the data security officer or something like this, you can go to the Security and Compliance Center and just have a look at the audit log reports, and then you can just create a report of externally sharing activities. So the question depends a little bit on what is your role or what is your focus.
And I think that's a good point as well, because there is different ways of accessing the same reports. I know when I was out in Munich last, I did a presentation on investigation and forensics within Office 365. And that same approach that you would use for checking shared content is also something that you can do using various mechanisms, from just the simple reporting mechanisms like Nicki just mentioned, all the way through using PowerShell to retrieve the information, to using the service endpoints that are available. So Microsoft have done a really good job on providing you a way to get as much information as possible out of the tenant, knowing that it's a cloud service and it's not like you can just jump into the ULS logs and find out what's going on. It doesn't quite work that way. So we have another question. Does the Rencore platform also give governance policies for overall environments? Yes, in the cloud offering of the Rencore platform, we do have rules defined to be able to go and check for specific configurations inside the environment and help you kind of become more focused on security and a more best practice approach than what you may have at the moment. But it's all the same process. You define the rules, and we define rules for that as what the best practice should be. And then we can surface those back to you to say, okay, maybe you want to make a change. So kind of almost very similar to the way that Secure Score in Microsoft does things. Secure Score in Microsoft provides you what would be controls. So what Microsoft does in Secure Score is they scan your tenant, they come back with a list of controls that need to be completed, and then your Secure Score number increases or decreases based on the controls that you've enabled or not enabled. So we kind of go that next step up, where we're able to go through and do a similar thing to Secure Score, but then add some extra kind of rules that the Secure Score wouldn't have, and also all the customizations and applications. Okay, and I think that brings us to our last question. So just coming up to the next webinar on October the 4th, this will be myself with Erwin and Juicy on here to do Microsoft Ignite Roundup, where we'll be talking about some of the great announcements that were made at Microsoft Ignite. So that'll be one to look forward to if you can't make it. I mean, just remember that they are broadcasting more or less all the sessions live, so you can go there. If you're going there, have a great time. I'm having a year out this time. I don't feel like going to Florida in the summer, so I'm going to have a bit of a break from there this time. But I just wanted to thank Nicki for joining us today. That was fantastic. Any parting words of wisdom, Nicki, you want to give us? So
thanks for this chance to talk about this topic. And So any words or any tips, I think is just take care about the security and data privacy stuff, because it's getting more and more important. Yeah.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. It's becoming more and more. That actually, over the past few months, most of the work that I've been involved in, most of the time, has been really around having conversations about security breaches that people have had and how to fix those. And actually 90% of them have all been within Office 365. So what we tend to find is, and to Nicki's point, is that often some of the bad security habits that we had on premises, we're actually bringing to the cloud with us. So let's focus on using the great technologies that Microsoft have given us. And then obviously here at Rencore, we can help you also with the Rencore platform. And together we can help you craft that great security posture, as it's called, for your organization. So thank you again, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And a recording of this will be later available today. But thank you again. Thank you, Nicki, and enjoy your day.
Thank you. Have a good day.